The afternoon sun was cruel that day. The streets shimmered with heat. The air stood still and not a single shadow moved. Amid this silence walked a 15-year-old boy named Alexander, his small figure barely visible through the rising waves of heat. He was barefoot, his steps uneven. The dust clung to his skin, and his torn shirt fluttered weakly with every breath of wind. His lips were dry, his throat parched, but he kept walking. He wasn't searching for food or money. He was searching for something simpler. A glass of water. For hours he had knocked on doors, hoping someone might show kindness. But every door closed, one after another. Some ignored him, some shouted, and a few pretended they didn't even hear his faint voice. Still, Alexander walked on. His mother was sick, lying in their broken hut on the edge of the city. She had a fever, her lips cracked from thirst. Alexander had promised her he would bring water. That promise kept him moving. As the sun began to sink lower, he reached a quiet neighborhood, the part of the city where the rich lived. Huge mansions stood behind tall iron gates, their gardens green and watered, their fountains running endlessly. The sight of those fountains made his dry throat ache even more. At last he stopped in front of one of the biggest houses. White marble walls, silver railings and glass windows shining in the sunlight. It was the mansion of Margaret White, a billionaire woman known for her pride and perfection. He hesitated for a moment, unsure if someone like her would even listen to a poor boy. But his mother's face flashed in his mind. Gathering courage, he walked up the steps and knocked on the massive wooden door. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the door opened. Standing there was Margaret herself, elegant, graceful, but with eyes colder than ice. Alexander tried to speak, his voice trembling. "Ma'am, I'm sorry to disturb you. I just need some water." Margaret looked at him, her brows narrowing. She took in his torn clothes, his messy hair, his bare feet, and her expression hardened. "Water?" she said sharply. "Do you think this is a charity house? Get out of here before I call the guards!" Alexander stepped back, frightened. "I'm sorry, ma'am, But before he could finish, she slammed the door. The sound echoed through the empty street. Alexander stood still, staring at the closed door. For a few seconds, he didn't move. Then his knees gave way and he sat on the steps. His eyes burned. But the tears that came out weren't from anger, they were from pain. He whispered softly, "I only wanted water." Slowly, he stood up, turned away, and crossed the road. His body felt heavier with every step. On the other side, he sat down near the sidewalk, his back against a lamppost. He closed his eyes. The world spun around him. Moments later, the sound of an engine broke the silence. A black luxury car stopped beside him. Inside sat William White, a powerful businessman, Margaret's husband. He was returning home from a meeting when he noticed the boy sitting alone on the road. Exhausted and trembling, William stepped out of the car and walked toward him. "Hey, son, what's wrong?" Alexander didn't respond. His lips moved, but no words came out. William knelt beside him and took out a bottle of water. "Here, drink this." Alexander's eyes opened slowly. He looked at the bottle as if it were the most precious thing in the world. His hands shook as he took it. He drank in small sips, his tears mixing with the water. William watched silently, his heart heavy. When the boy finished, William asked gently, "Where do you live?" Alexander looked across the road. "There, I went to that house to ask for water." William turned and looked in the same direction. His face changed. That was his own mansion. He felt a cold wave run through him. "You mean my house?" he asked in disbelief. Alexander nodded slowly. "The lady there? She told me to leave." William stood up. For a moment, he didn't say a word. Then he helped the boy to his feet and said, "Come with me." As they walked back toward the mansion, Alexander's heart pounded. He didn't know what would happen next. But William's tone carried warmth, something he hadn't felt all day. When they entered, Margaret stood in the hallway, surprised. "William? What's going on? Who is this boy?" William looked at her, really looked at her, and said quietly, "This is the boy who came to our door asking for water." Margaret froze. Her eyes widened. William continued, his voice shaking with emotion. "And you turned him away." The silence that followed was heavy. For the first time in years, Margaret lowered her gaze. William said softly, "You have everything, Margaret. Wealth, comfort, respect. But you've lost the one thing that matters, compassion. He turned to Alexander. Come, son. You'll have dinner with us tonight. That evening, for the first time in his life, Alexander ate at a table covered with silver and crystal. Margaret said nothing. But deep inside, something began to change, a feeling she hadn't known in years. Guilt and realization. The night after that incident was the quietest the mansion had ever known. Margaret sat alone in her room, staring at the glass of water on her bedside table. It looked so simple, clear, still, and pure. Yet it carried a weight she could no longer ignore. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Alexander's face, dusty, tired, and full of pain. His trembling voice echoed in her mind. I just need some water. For years, she had surrounded herself with luxury, diamonds, silk curtains, servants who never said no. But that night, for the first time, she realized how poor she truly was. Poor in humanity, poor in compassion. Downstairs, William was sitting with Alexander in the guest room. The boy had eaten, but he was still nervous, unsure if he truly belonged in this house. William noticed his hesitation and smiled gently. You don't have to be afraid, son. Rest tonight. Tomorrow will be a new beginning. Alexander nodded softly. It was the first time anyone had called him son. Morning came with golden light pouring through the windows. The scent of fresh flowers filled the mansion. But this morning felt different, quieter, softer. Margaret came downstairs, her eyes heavy but calm. She saw Alexander helping a servant arrange the breakfast table. His hands were small, but the way he moved showed respect and humility. For a moment, Margaret hesitated at the doorway. Then, with a quiet breath, she walked toward him. Good morning, she said. Alexander turned, startled, unsure how to respond. Good morning, ma'am, he whispered. Margaret looked at the glass of milk he was holding and said softly, I'm sorry about yesterday. The boy blinked, confused. He didn't expect those words. I was wrong, Margaret continued. I forgot that kindness costs nothing. You came to my door thirsty, and I shut it on your face. I don't deserve forgiveness, but still, I hope you'll give it. Alexander lowered his head. You don't need to say sorry, ma'am. My mother says God always forgives those who realize their mistakes. Those words struck Margaret deeper than anything ever had. She turned away quickly, wiping her tears. Days turned into weeks. William arranged for Alexander's mother to receive medical care and brought her to a nearby home. He carried kindness in his soul, the very thing she had lost long ago. One afternoon, as she watched him studying in the garden, she whispered to herself, This boy came for water and brought life back to my home. Months passed. Alexander joined school with William's help. He studied hard, determined to make the people who helped him proud. Margaret slowly grew close to him. She would ask about his day, help him with homework, and sometimes just sit quietly beside him, feeling peace she hadn't felt in years. William noticed the change in her. The coldness that once ruled her face had vanished. She smiled more. She spoke gently. And every week she went out to distribute food and water to the poor. A routine she never missed again. The mansion once filled only with silence and pride, now echoed with laughter, warmth, and gratitude. The world had changed for Alexander. He was no longer the poor boy in torn clothes. He was now a young man, intelligent and kind, studying at one of the city's top schools, supported by William and Margaret. His mother had fully recovered and often visited him at the mansion. Whenever she met Margaret, tears filled her eyes. May God bless you, she would say. You gave my son a life I could never dream of. But Margaret would always reply, No, he gave me back my soul. Then came the day that I tested them all. William fell ill, a sudden heart problem. The doctors did their best, but his condition worsened. During his final days, he called Alexander and Margaret close. He took Alexander's hand in his weak grip. Son, you have changed this home. I saw you grow from a thirsty boy into a man filled with kindness. Promise me something. Never let this world make your heart hard. Stay the same, no matter how high you rise. Tears rolled down Alexander's cheeks. I promise, sir. I'll never forget your kindness. William smiled faintly, then turned to Margaret. And you, my love, you found your compassion again. Keep it alive. That night, William took his final breath, peacefully. surrounded by the two people whose lives he had forever connected. After his passing, Margaret was broken, but she didn't let grief destroy her. Instead, she decided to honor William's memory in the best way possible. She sold one of their properties and used the money to build a small foundation, the William and Alexander Hope Center, a place where poor children could eat, study, and find shelter. Alexander helped her every step of the way. He managed the school, taught classes, and told his story to the children. How a single act of rejection led him to kindness, and how forgiveness turned enemies into family. The foundation grew over the years, helping hundreds of poor children. Margaret's name, once associated with pride, became known for generosity. One evening, as the sun set behind the hills, Alexander stood at the gate of the mansion, the same place where his journey had begun years ago. He remembered that day vividly, the thirst, the humiliation, the pain. But this time he smiled, because from that pain had risen purpose. Margaret walked beside him, her hair now streaked with gray, her heart full of peace. "Do you ever regret knocking on my door that day?" she asked quietly. Alexander shook his head. "No, ma'am. That was the day my life truly began, and yours too." They both stood silently, watching the sky turn golden. And then Margaret said softly, "You know, Alexander, that glass of water you asked for, and I think it saved 2 lives." Alexander smiled, looking toward the horizon. Sometimes it only takes one drop of kindness to fill an empty heart. And so, the poor boy who once begged for water became a symbol of hope. The woman who once turned him away became a mother to many. Together they built a legacy not of wealth, but of compassion. Because kindness doesn't cost a fortune. It begins with a single act, a single heart, and sometimes a single glass of water. Moral: never underestimate the power of kindness. A single act of compassion can change not just one life, but the world around it.